So I want to talk about a time in the early web when I kind of reminisce about this, where there was this vision that anybody could create a website. You didn't have to be technical. And I kind of like that because although we have social media today, we have WordPress, we have Substack, we have goodness knows what else, it's not difficult to get online if you want to have your content online. There was this idea back then that you could create your own web pages yourself. You didn't necessarily, there wasn't this expectation that you would have to be technical. So there was software that came with Windows, for example, called FrontPage Express, which would let anybody who could use the word processor create websites. And yes, we might look back and laugh at them and they might not have looked the most stylish, but it was democratizing the web, and that I think was a really powerful thing. Netscape Communicator was a browser suite. It had the browser navigator, it had the mail and news groups, and it also came with Netscape Composer, which was a similar sort of thing. It would enable you to use this idea of what's called WYSIWYG. It's an old term. What you see is what you get. In fact, that Netscape Composer is still available to download today. It's still maintained under the Mozilla SeaMonkey suite. I did check it out a couple of years back, and it still generates HTML4 output. There's no HTML5. It's pretty terrible for today's standards. But back then, it was brilliant. And although today we have, I guess if you're not technical and you want to create a website, you're probably going to end up going down the route of WordPress. But even then, that's quite limiting. Like if you really want to have a bespoke design, something that's not a theme that someone else has built, then you have to know your stuff. Basically, you can't. It's not like if you were to use some other software such as PowerPoint or Word or Keynote. Then you can create content and without getting too down into the weeds of the technicalities. And there was this dream at one point where the web could be like that too, and it hasn't ended up that way. And I guess perhaps it's a little bit like maybe music production. Not everyone is going to be a music producer, no matter how easy the software is to use. But perhaps not. And I think that there is. I would love to see some software come along that can enable anyone who doesn't necessarily have the inclination to learn HTML or CSS create a modern, website for 2021. Unfortunately, what I'm about to show you, FrontPage, it still runs in the right environment. The websites haven't aged well, but that's what I wanted to show you. And so let's dive in and have a look at what Microsoft FrontPage in '98 looked like and what designing websites was like back in the late 90s.
So here we are, and we are in Windows 98. So this takes me right back to when I was 15 years old and I was using my family computer and creating websites. And the way I did that was through Microsoft FrontPage. So let's go back and look at what it was like back then to create a web page. So here's FrontPage 98, and you can see we've got two options. I want to create a new, what they used to call a front page web, which was essentially a project, what you'd refer to as a project now, I guess. So lots of options here. One page web, if you wanted to create a website that was just one page, and you could then extend it on and create page by page. So much more flexible, didn't kind of mess around with any sort of template. You could just do your own thing, get on with it. Import, that's quite self-explanatory. And then we've got these wizards or templates. So we've got corporate presence wizard. So create a professional internet presence for your organization, as a lot of companies would have been starting to realize they needed to do back then. Customer support, we've got discussion web. Now that's an interesting one because that actually would create a fully functioning forum. So it would be a website that you could edit in this, what you see is what you get editor, front page, but it also had the ability to for the end user to post messages, reply to messages, essentially a fully functioning forum, as you can see there, full text search and everything. And that's pretty cool. So if you had, let's say you're at university or school, or you had a hobbyist group and you wanted to put up a forum for them, then whack out FrontPage and create a few pages and just add a discussion web on the end of it, and there you go. So pretty interesting that was so easy, point and click and no code needed. We've got empty web, personal web, project web. So those are the options that you have. So let's have a look at personal web. This is one I remember using back in the late 90s. So I'm going to call this Marc Wickens in 2021. Somehow I doubt that the developers of FrontPage 98 ever expected someone to be creating creating a website with this in 2021, but here we are. So let's create that. So we need to log into our local web server. Interestingly, the username is case sensitive and the password is as well. And it's interesting because back then, things which we think of as norms now, which is that usernames are case insensitive and passwords are case sensitive, they weren't norms. This stuff was still being figured out, which I find fascinating. Anyway, I'm going to go and OK on that, and we're going to load up FrontPage. So here we go. Right, so we've got our basic structure here. So our homepage, we've got a page for our interests, we've got a photo album, we've got favorites. So this would have been what your typical homepage had back in the late 90s. Along here, we've got this bar down the left. This is kind of reminiscent of what Outlook Express and Outlook used to have back then, which was like a kind of a global navigation bar on the left. So we've got folders, we've got all of the files, which is kind of, I guess, a flat list of all your files. We've got the navigation view we just saw there. We've got hyperlinks, which would be a way to kind of visualize the hyperlinks within your site, which if, as would be the case here, you are manually managing individual HTML files and how they link together. This would have been quite useful. And here you've actually got something that will give you the status of hyperlinks. So I don't know how this worked, but I'm guessing maybe it just checks each of those to check that HTTP 200 comes back. I'm imagining that now there's going to be some sort of SSL handshake error, so that's why they're all coming back as unknown. And then we had themes, which I'll come back to, and finally tasks, which was interesting that they added in a kind of a to-do list into this web publishing software. But there you go. I guess they had to compete with Dreamweaver. Maybe Dreamweaver had that as well. I don't know. So let's have a look at themes. So I distinctly remember using themes back then. Now you didn't have to use themes, and that's what's so great about FrontPage, is that you could, with a couple of menus and buttons, you can have your own background, your own styles, and you could be positioning text where you wanted on the page using the controls. But if you wanted to get something that was a little bit more professional or had a little bit more effort put into it than you wanted to put into in yourself, then you could use one of these themes. So there are loads in here. There are tons. So there's Zero. So I distinctly remember using this one back in the day. World Finance. If you were into finance at the time, working in the banking industry, maybe you wanted to create a website to impress all your finance buddies. Well, you could use this theme if you wanted to do that. What else have we got? Saturday TV Tunes, which when you look at it, what a perfect name for that theme. Safari. Back then, when you used the word Safari in relation to internet technologies, nobody thought that you were talking about a web browser. This, of course, referencing the activity which involves looking at animals. Construction zone. Back then, there was this kind of reminds me how you would see under construction signs all the time on web pages. Capsules, I distinctly remember using that one. You turn on active graphics, you get slightly different graphics. That means that when the user hovers over, they get a cool effect, which would have been done using JavaScript. There was no CSS back then, or if there was, it was very early days, and I don't think FrontPage 98 supported it. I believe they had it supporting FrontPage 2000. Might be wrong there, but we can find out in a moment. And blends, that was my favorite. So that's the one I'm going to use today. And for the record, I still think this looks pretty good in 2021. So I'm going to go with that. So all you have to do is click apply, and all the pages in your site, even if you've got like 200 pages, within a few seconds, they'll all be rethemed. And this was before the days of CSS. So this is not a case of updating one file, because that, of course, you can do now quite easily by just updating your CSS file. In fact, it's quite common to do that. Whereas this was actually using manual attributes on all of the HTML. So let's go and look in some of these pages. So we've got the structure here, and this, you'll see later, this is how this structure is actually linked to the built-in menu navigation system. So if we go into our home page, we open up the front page editor, so you can see it opens up in a new window, This in FrontPage 2000, these will be combined into one window. But in FrontPage 98, there was two separate views. You'd have the Explorer view and you'd have the editor view. So we've got our menu here. So this is, this must be the menu items at the same level. So anything got this level. So I could add in another page here, new top page. I could say like, maybe I'll add about here. And then that should, when we view this, that will appear up here when we go to preview that in the browser. But this is all configurable. So all of these menus, you could put a menu anywhere you want. You could have one in the middle of the page if you wanted. You can also have other shared parts of the site. So these little hyphenated lines here, these dashed lines, that's representing a shared border. So if we look in the HTML view, we can see that the first part of the site is welcome to my website. The first thing we see really apart from the metadata. Whereas if we look at the preview, we see there's actually a load of images and buttons and stuff. And that's because these are inserted at runtime when you publish the site. So this HTML view is kind of hiding all that from you. So you don't have to think about that. But when you publish it, all that gets inserted. So you can kind of think of FrontPage as the prototypical static site generator. So if you've heard of something called Hugo, which is a common static site generator now, you could kind of think of FrontPage as a much easier to use version of that for a start. It didn't need any command line console. You didn't need to install Homebrew and type commands or anything like that. But I guess FrontPage did cost a lot more. Hugo's free. So yeah, there's swings and roundabouts there. Let's try and add a new site then into our navigation structure. So under about, what I can do is I can go to new page. So I can say maybe about me, so I can go project. Maybe I'll list some of my projects there. And what else could I put under about? Maybe I'll just put references. I don't know. Maybe this is, I was going to advertise my my availability as an employee. I might want to put some references there. Let me just rename that. Okay, so that's our structure there. Favorites, let me put a new page in there. So rename maybe favorite bands. I can list some of my favorite bands there. And you can see as I'm doing this, the news pages are created here. So what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to go into one of these and we'll be able to edit them. So let's go into about. And let's insert a picture. So let's go to image. Now, by default, it wants you to insert a picture from within your project, but of course you might want to insert a picture that's somewhere else on your file system. So we can of course do that. So we go to our My Documents, and here's an image that was taken on an iPhone. I bet that was never, I bet back in 1998 they had no idea that one day you'd have a phone that could take high resolution images. This image has been compressed down, I should say. And in fact, I've resized it there. You can actually click this button here, and FrontPage would resize it to match the dimensions you'd resized it to within FrontPage, so that by default, if you didn't do that, you could end up with like a very large image that was like maybe 1 or 2 megabytes, but you'd resized it down to like 30 pixels wide or something using the HTML. So there you go. There's our image that's been inserted, and you can see it's still referencing See My Documents. Whereas if I click Save, what should happen is it should automatically know that that's an external image and it needs to be within our project. So it will ask you to save it within the project. So I can change the folder it's saved in. It's actually detected that it's an image. It's put it in the images folder, which is quite cool. I could rename it if I wanted that to be a bit more descriptive. There we go. And then I just click OK. And then you can find that our HTML should be up to date, and that's now a relative path as opposed to an absolute one. So there's some other cool things. So if we were to go, let's say we go to our references, we could put some other cool things in here. So there was some active components, active elements. So we could put a hit counter in. We could say, let's always have 10 digits, and let's reset the counter. So let's start it off at 500, and I want to go with the fire. And I could just say, look how many hits I've had. Hits is something you don't hear that often these days, is it? Hits. How many hits has your website had? And then let's go, where else could we could go into the bands. We could create a list of our favorite bands. So if we go to create a bulleted list, so let's go with Manic Street Preachers, Public Service Broadcasting. And we could even create a hyperlink. You can see there the default protocol being HTTP and not HTTPS, as it would have been back then. New window, let's make it open in a new window, and then click OK. What does style do? So there's the idea of adding a style class there, which is pretty cool, and an ID. So this looks like they might have had some sort of knowledge that CSS was around the corner. Let me just see if I can change the background color. What does that do? There we go. There's a little bit of inline CSS there, which is pretty cool. So it was there, I guess. Doesn't that look great? Yeah, if you're wondering why it was green, I think it's because I still had it selected, and it's obviously done like an invert of the color. And then, so that's our bands page. So what else could we do? Let's go and create a new, what templates did we have? Oh, a guest book. Let's do a guest book. So delete the comment. Is that actually an HTML comment there? It is. It's a WebBot full text. Oh no, that seems like that's not the comment. Okay, I'll leave that alone. Don't want to break it. So this will be a guest book, so I can get rid of all this, go straight to the add your comment. So this is all one big component that will just basically turn this page into a guest book, which is pretty cool, I think. So let's call this guest book. Now, this is because I created this via the file new rather than the front page explorer. It won't be in my navigation, so I'll have to drag it in here. So it's very easy. I could make it a child of my interest page. I can make it a child of, I can even go down a level lower, or I could bring it, I think, up to the top. And then can I move it to the end? About, yeah. So now if I rename, this will rename it within the navigation, so I can call it guest book. Guest book, one word. Yeah, I can say it's one word. Like website. Okay, so let's now let's preview. No, that's publish. No, I don't want to publish it. I want to preview, which I think I have to go back to the editor and click preview. And this should open up my browser. Oh, it's gone straight to the guestbook page. Let's go back to the home page. So we've got our navigation here. Let's go down a level. Now I want to have, I feel like that's not doing what I want. I want to have in the home page, I want to have the menu for the same level. So let's have a look here. Can we edit this? Front page component properties. So same level, parent level, same level, child level, top level. Let's do top level. That's what I want, I think. That's it. Let's save that. The web server is busy, you can see, so that must mean something's happening. Now let's go back home. Yes, okay, I had to refresh it. Okay, so I've got home, about, guest book. So let's go to about. And there you go. Interestingly, the default alt text is not a description of the image, but the file name. In fact, the old file name and the number of bytes. So if you were using screen reader software, and that was possibly one of the reasons why FrontPage was criticized, was little things like that. Guest book, let's see if this works. So this is running off a local web server, which I think must have been based off of IIS, but it's called Personal Web Server. So pretty cool, this stuff is all running on Windows 98, which is essentially based on DOS, which dates back to the 80s. So I can say, hey, love the site. What's your internet mail address, and click submit. No styling on this page for some reason. And where's my comment? After you submit comments, you will need to reload this page. Okay, let's do that. And there we go. Today's date, which is the 21st of November 21. So a lot of 21s there. Let's go back up. Let's go to our favorites. And then we had bands. And there we go. There's our CSS there. I can even view the source here, which will open in Notepad because back then browsers did not have developer tools. Now, FrontPage would have got a lot of heat because, as you can see, a lot of the HTML it generates, there's a lot of gibberish here, or a lot of stuff which is not needed. It's messy HTML. But at the same time, if you look at any website that's created today using the likes of WordPress, or even if you look at the alternatives, if you're not creating a website, you might be posting on social media instead. If you were to right-click and view the source of that, you're probably going to get something just as messy, if not more. So I think it was the direction of the web anyway, so I wouldn't get too worried about that. Let's see if this works. This probably won't, because I would imagine they're using, the redirect worked. So it did. If you notice the top, it redirected to manicstreetpreachers.com, which is the new URL. So the redirect worked, but then I'm getting some sort of TLS error came in because Internet Explorer 5 will not support the latest version of TLS, which is fine. So there we go. That's what FrontPage 98 looked like. This is what it was like to be an amateur web designer in the late 90s. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments.